Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of the Alder Hour, your favorite way to end your working day. I'm Matt Alder. I host the Recruiting Future podcast, and I have the joy of hosting the Alder Hour as well, which is what you're watching right now. So this show is part of the Purple Acorn Network. Head over to purpleacornnetwork.com after the show and find out about all the other great shows that Purple Acorn bring to the world. Also, make sure you follow Purple Acorn on LinkedIn. It's the best way to get access to this show and all the other shows on the network. This episode is also available as a podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Now, we're going out live, and to prove that, please write us some comments. So we're covering lots of different topics today. Write us some, write your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you think, and we will do our best to, excuse me, told you we were live. We'll do our best to read those out and engage with them as we move through the episode. So let's kick off. And without further ado, I would like to welcome my amazing two co-hosts to the screen. Hi, Rhona. Hi, Jocelyn. How are you both doing?
Hey, Matt. Doing good.
Yeah, doing really well.
Excellent. Where in the world are you, Jocelyn? You're traveling at the moment.
I am, yes. I'm in Orlando right now at a conference. So, sitting in a hotel room at the moment.
The joy. What's the conference?
The conference is for the PEO space.
Okay.
And lots of HR practitioners, lots of PEO providers. So it's all good stuff.
Cool. Excellent. Rhona, how are you? You're not traveling, obviously.
No, I am doing good. I am at home. Happy to be at home.
Absolutely. Yes, me too, which is good. Been doing quite a lot of traveling recently. So what's coming up on the show tonight? Rhona, what do you have for us?
I am talking about a company, Ulta, you might have heard of it, that is actually paying their employees to be influencers.
Interesting. Jocelyn, what do you have?
We're going to talk a little bit about what happens when leaders get the hiring process wrong and why.
Interesting. Something that's quite common. I think we'll probably find out. Fantastic. So looking forward to hearing about both of those things a little bit later on. We've also got a fantastic guest lined up to speak to in a little while. But before we do anything else, let's go and do points and pints. That's the longest pour of a beer ever. It really is. So if you've not watched the show before, why have you not watched the show before? If you've not watched the show before, in this part of the show, we sample allegedly our favorite drinks, but it's turned into a bit of an experimental tasting session, and talk about a couple of articles that we found in the news this week. So my drink this week, those of you who watched last week will remember I was drinking this Lucky Saint, where's the camera? There it is, this Lucky Saint lemon and lager thing, and I absolutely hated it. And then by the end, I quite liked it. So I thought I'd give it a second chance to see if I like it. Rhona, what are you drinking tonight?
So I've been on TikTok all weekend, and everyone's talking about this Trader Joe's matcha lemonade. So I had to try it. I'm not a big sparkling water fan, but everyone says this one's amazing, so I'm excited to try it.
So it's matcha lemonade, but it's really sparkling water.
Yes.
Wow. The power of TikTok and branding is amazing. Justin, have you got anything in Orlando for us?
You know what? Running from the conference center all the way back to the hotel room, I couldn't stop for a beer, but I'd give anything for some water right now. Let me tell you.
No, I can imagine. Right. So let's just open this. If it sprays everywhere, there we are. And it's probably takes less of a pour than the opening sequence. So do I still like this? Do I hate it? Do you know what? I think I quite like it. I think it's grown on me. How's the matcha lemonade sparkling water?
It's interesting. It is interesting. Maybe I'll like it more by the end of the show.
Yeah, okay. Well, you just, you crack on. Cool. Okay, so let's go to our first article. So announcing the Frontline Gap report, what 7,500 workers told us about culture, recognition, and communication. So this is a survey, and it's been done by a employee engagement platform, but the results are really interesting. So what this survey says is that it's a survey of frontline workers, so restaurant workers, people at the front line of the company, people who are not in the office. Half of frontline workers say their company cares more about office workers than about them. And there's some other kind of quite sort of, I suppose, devastating statistics in there for employers. 49% believe that they have a bigger impact than their desk-based colleagues, but they're not recognized for it. 87% aren't sure that their company culture applies to them, and a whopping 46% don't even know who their CEO is. And it's interesting because I'm not sure this comes as a kind of a massive surprise, because I think it's kind of an area that it's an area where sort of people have potentially been sort of disengaged for a long time. We have the kind of whole sort of pandemic thing going on, the whole sort of office workers working from home hybrid thing happening after that. So there's obviously a kind of a growing gap between different types of employees here. Jocelyn, what's your take on this one? Are you surprised by these numbers?
I'm not surprised. No, I worked for a company that had a really large frontline worker population. And I think there's definitely the sentiment that office workers are treated better, that they get better benefits, whether it's, majority of them are going to be salaried. So they don't have to clock in, clock out. There's more flexibility with their schedule. They can do hybrid when they want to, whereas frontline has to actually, show up to work. So that's a really big issue. And then, that 46% that doesn't know their CEO makes me really sad. How did that happen?
And do you think it's because a lot of sort of, employee comms isn't designed for people without desks or people who aren't accessing a computer all the time? Is that part of the issue?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how comms have generally been structured is really for people who have access to a device, of course. And I think it's been a really big challenge for HR professionals to figure out how to better engage, how to better communicate with frontline workers. And obviously, we're seeing that here. But I'm not sure if there's a solution out there that is specific to comms for frontline workers or not. And if there is, good for them. But absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. That's a major issue.
Yeah, and I think some of the kind of implications of this, it says that 87% of frontline workers aren't confident there's a clear path forward for their current company. So, suggesting a high risk of employee churn for a part of the working population who are kind of directly affecting the turnover and the income and the profit of the company. Rhona, what's your take on this?
I mean, I was definitely not surprised, but the 87% who aren't sure their company culture even applies to them was the one that was like, whoa. Because from where I've sat, I've always seen like, oh, the company culture and that type of events and stuff that it's not the culture, but what people do, all of that stuff is usually directed at frontline workers, like when there's events or stuff like that. That has been my experience. The thing that reading this, I wasn't surprised, but I'm encouraged because I was just at Unleash and I did a series of interviews for the podcast for Adam Posner's podcast with people that are frontline, like executives that have frontline. So I spoke to people from UPS. I spoke to the TA lead for Pepsi and large companies like this. And they all had a very big focus on internal mobility and growing their frontline workers. And those conversations were all amazing. And that's where I'm like, okay, yes, this is a problem. We've always known about it, but they're large companies, because these aren't small companies, what I just mentioned. They're large companies really doing the work and doing something about it so that their frontline workers don't feel this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of some suggestions sort of in this article about what to what to do. The article's by an employee engagement platform, so strangely, a lot of the solutions are all about building digital hubs and all that sort of stuff. Establishing two-way communication channels, shining a spotlight on frontline achievements with real-time recognition, and then it kind of obviously mentions communication as a really important part of that, and career development paths, as well. I mean, Jocelyn, any other thoughts on what might solve this kind of issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, a lot of people assume that when you're looking at a career ladder, all you can do is move up vertically, that there isn't, lateral movement or lateral plus up one or anything like that. There are really great companies out there. I have a good friend who's the CEO of a company called Escalate, and they do learning and development for frontline workers. That's what their business does, and I think that there needs to be more of an emphasis. And I'll speak to why I just brought up Sean in a second. I think that there needs to be more of an emphasis on what are your career goals, not what is it that we can provide to you today necessarily. Employers have to be okay with knowing that they're developing employees to potentially leave and go somewhere else.
Yep.
But that's how you keep someone engaged. That's why you keep high performers on the team, and high performers on the team that are influencing other team members in a really positive way that'll resonate even after they leave. But one of the reasons why I brought up Sean's company is because it's quite interesting. What they do is they work with companies like CVS, and they'll work with their frontline workers and give them a year of technical training. So after that year is done, the CVS employee would go from being a cashier to now being, system admin number one or something like that.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't just have to be this vertical growth. There should be an opportunity for horizontal movement, and I do believe that they need to focus more on that when it comes to frontline workers.
No, that makes perfect sense. It sounds like there are lots of solutions to this issue. So people just need to really think about it. Let's move on to the next one. This is fascinating. So Salesforce buys MoonHub, a startup building AI tools for hiring. So I kind of came across this article, and I was a bit confused because I hadn't really not been kind of any sort of much talk about this. I didn't really know who MoonHub were, but then I kind of dived in a bit and read a bit more, and I think this is a really interesting situation. So MoonHub were a startup that were building AI agents for hiring. And there were lots of things that were different about the way they did it, all that sort of stuff. They announced, I think it was about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that Salesforce had acquired them. Salesforce then countered and said they hadn't acquired them. What they'd done is they'd hired all of the staff, or some of the staff, some of the employees. So it sounds like a kind of a sort of a weird kind of acqui-hire sort of thing. But basically, the people with the skills who are building AI agents for hiring are now part of Salesforce. Now, you could look at this as kind of a very sort of minor thing, but I think this is a really important signal. I think particularly with the AI stuff that's going on, it's very difficult to kind of predict where it's all going. So we kind of have to look for these signals, if that makes any sense. So Salesforce have a platform called Agentforce. And Agentforce allows companies to build AI agents to do various things in their business using their data in the Salesforce data cloud. So that's the context here. Now, if you're an organization, you're buying these tools from Salesforce, you're doing this at a corporate enterprise level. And what this says to me is, if this suddenly has the capability to build AI agents for hiring, for recruiting, that's a decision that gets made at a corporate level. So, talent acquisition, HR as well, to a certain respect, has ways of working and software imposed on them from a kind of a centralized purchasing decision. And we've seen this before with ATSs bundled into some of the big systems, Oracle systems, SAP systems. But this is quite different, because this is all about sort of automation and efficiency, doing things quickly, getting better at hiring. And there's a real kind of threat here that TA teams just might be completely sort of railroaded out of existence by software that they've had no input in purchasing. So to me, this is a big wake-up call that says decisions about AI in recruiting aren't necessarily being made in HR or TA. They could be being made at that corporate level. And actually, it's really important that a TA has a voice to shape those decisions. And that to me is the most important part of this story. Rhona, what do you think? Am I going mad, or is this a significant thing that's happened?
No, you're absolutely right. Because when a company is a company that uses Salesforce, those decisions are made at other tables where HR usually isn't at. But I think we go back to something we spoke about a few weeks ago, where now the modern CHRO has to be technical. And this is another reason why, because now, if you are technical, now you can and will and should be invited to these conversations. But I absolutely see what you're saying and how that could play out, where it's like, okay, TA, this is the software that you use because we're a Salesforce shop.
Yeah, absolutely. Or goodbye, TA. We've replaced you with this software, which is probably more likely.
I'm trying not to go that route, but
I
definitely
know.
that
But
could.
I think that's how kind of urgent this is. It's like, if you want to have a say in how AI works in your business, you need to be having those conversations right now, not waiting to see what happens and then suddenly you're not there anymore. Jocelyn, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, same as you all. I think this is a situation where if the HR leader doesn't have that strategic seat at the table, so to speak, and the level of influence that's required, then this will completely slip past them. Absolutely. I do think it's really important for HR leaders, especially now more than ever, to be very proactive about discussions that are being had at a technical level, and really showcasing the fact that they're able to, I guess what would the word be? Showcasing that they're able to contribute toward a return on investment with a decision like this, rather than just being some type of cost center, by really exemplifying the level of experience that they have with software, and how that impacts the business as well. So, more proactivity is going to be crucial, or yeah, you might miss the boat.
And I think also I think the last thing about this is it's not just about TA being automated away or not, as the case may be. It's the fact that the way that the company does hiring is being shaped by people who aren't experts in hiring, who are perhaps taking their lead from vendors and all that sort of stuff. And that to me is a disaster for an organization. And I think it's up to TA and HR to kind of really push that and make sure that's understood, because as we know, recruiting can still be seen as a very transactional, cost center based thing, even though we all know it's not. So yes, it is a bit of a situation. So talking about situations, let's go to the situation room. So hi, Justin. Following brilliantly on from what we were just talking about, tell us what you have for us about leading hiring role.
Yeah. So really, it's actually not necessarily a specific situation, but based on an article. So, what leaders get wrong about hiring and why it matters. It was in Forbes. And I'll be honest, there were a lot of things in here that were kind of, no brainer uh, type things, like, unconscious bias and um, talking too much in an interview and stuff like that. But there were some interesting statistics that I thought were relevant in this situation. So here, sorry, I'm just going to read it for a moment. This was a big one for me. Leadership turnover averaging 18% annually. That is extremely costly when you think about how long it takes to bring a C-level on board. You get that C-level on board and you're paying them a bunch of money, and they end up leaving. And it could have been stopped from the very beginning. It could have been prevented by just having better hiring practices. That gets to be so expensive. It's really disruptive to the organization's strategy, especially at the departmental level. And of course, it doesn't feel great from a morale perspective for employees who are underneath that individual who ends up leaving. There were a few things that the article mentioned that I thought were pretty interesting. The first is, and this might be obvious, but using the wrong assessments. So, I mean, I have seen situations where hiring managers have asked for candidates to complete a Myers-Briggs test. Why? Why?
Yes.
That has You do that when you want to work with them on their development.
Yeah.
This isn't to assess whether or not they are the right fit for a job. So wrong assessments was a pretty big thing because unless it's something that's going to really validate from a predictive perspective how good somebody might be at their job, just you should completely throw it out the window in your interview process. The other thing, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too, to be honest, is taking an unstructured approach to interviews. Uh, it is easy to often just fall into a more casual conversation with an
Mm.
individual when you're interviewing them instead of following through on, you know, that more structured approach that is good from not just like identifying the right candidate perspective, but also, and this is kind of where I always put my risk hat on from a liability perspective as well. You want to ensure that you're treating all of your candidates fairly and that it's been a fair interview process. So that was another piece to it too. The last thing that I thought was really interesting was not prioritizing interview training. I see
Mm.
this happening
Mm.
everywhere where interviewers are not getting the appropriate training they need to assess right on their own, but also from again a risk perspective, they aren't trained on what questions they should or should not ask, and that's where you see a lot of risk with talent acquisition is particularly right there when people don't know that they're asking the wrong question, or when there's an assessment that might have some bias to it, or whatever it is. So HR needs to be really heavily involved in that type of structure.
Yeah, 100%. I think that kind of goes back to what we were just saying about letting the experts in hiring define how hiring works. And it was interesting. I kind of read through this, and as you say, there's some things that seem sort of really obvious here, but I kind of reflected on it, and I am so in a TA bubble. My entire LinkedIn feed is just full of TA people, and you can sometimes take a lot of this stuff for granted because people are talking about it all the time. It's like I don't have to persuade my LinkedIn network of any of these things because they see the value. But actually, the vast majority of companies in the world don't have that kind of expertise on tap, or they don't have enough of it, or they don't tap into it. And this is a very common in terms of how hiring gets done. And I think the other thing around this is, think people kind of reflect on how they were hired and think that's how they should hire in the future. So these mistakes kind of get compounded and passed through generations, and it's a kind of massive issue. And I think that the numbers that it was putting around, 80% turnover and 45% of bad hires attributed to lack of process are just staggering and just illustrate how far there is to go with all of this. I mean, do you think that what's going to kind of speed this up? Do you think that the technology is going to help here? I mean, how can we sort of improve recruitment across the board rather than in just a few sort of larger businesses with switched on TA teams?
Oh, that's the magic question, right? Uh, I could sit here all day and talk about what solutions could look like, but I think there are a few key things to really consider here. The first is that HR and TA leaders really need to prioritize interview training. That's so critical, and they need to put more structure to their entire process, not just the actual interview process, but the entire hiring process. From this is how we write job descriptions to and ensuring that those are compliant as well and they kind of meet all the requirements, to ensuring that the role is classified properly. Is this exempt or non-exempt? Is it hourly or salary? And having those types of structures is going to be really helpful, because what ends up happening is you start building a culture of consistency. And that's really what interviewers need, is a culture of consistency. That we talk about, like unconscious bias. We talk about lack of structured interviews. We talk about lack of interview training. All of those could be solved with a culture of consistency. And that's what I think really at the end of the day is what will come into play.
And really kind of coming at it from the sort of the risk and compliance and regulation lens that you have is probably very, very valuable, because it's the one thing that might actually drive some of this change. And I think sort of one last thing for me, it was interesting the bit about the wrong assessments, and also falling victim to common biases. I just think this is such a big thing. People having their own sort of pet tests that they like to do, or ridiculous questions that they like to ask, and having that kind of just the bias baked in that they think it's the right thing to do, and it gets them the right results. And I've had conversations with people who do things like this. They ask the same question, they just come up with things like, my gut feel just tells me it's the right person to recruit. And when you challenge them, they just point to all the successful people they've hired, but we don't hear about the non-successful people they hired, or the people who didn't work out, or the people that they didn't hire who could have been even more successful. So I just think that the open-mindedness and self-awareness is just such a key part of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you talk about open-mindedness, that's so key to this whole process. You have to be very thoughtful about your interview process, because this is a huge investment in hiring somebody. You see, these staggering numbers, the amount of money that employers are losing when there's attrition. And so being very thoughtful about the interview questions you ask, the assessments that you present, the people you include in the interview process, what the interview process should even look like, what's being communicated to the candidate in terms of reality of the job, etc. Super key.
Absolutely. Well, Jocelyn, thank you very much for talking to us. I will let you go before your Wi-Fi falls over completely. Enjoy the rest of your conference. And now we have a great guest to talk to. There he is. Hi, Jeff. Welcome to the podcast. It's not a podcast.
Hi, Matt.
Even. There we are. I got confused.
Yeah. Great to be here.
Yes, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you here. Can you just introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do?
Sure. I'm Jeff Bill. I'm the founder of Warden AI, and we audit and certify that AI systems in HR and TA are fair and compliant to use.
Fantastic.
So, great segue talking about bias in recruitment in the last one, and talking about AI bias here.
Absolutely. Kind of all roads lead to this conversation, definitely. Obviously, lots of things that we want to sort of dive into and talk about. Before we do, though, just tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to start a company like this?
Yeah, so I do have a background in HR and TA, background in AI originally as a developer and engineer, and in startups working particularly in regulation technology. So basically using AI to help support regulation and basically provide trust to online platforms. And what we found in doing that was that our AI systems were not checked, were not inspected for compliance and regulation, even though we were using them to help people be compliant and regulated. And that kind of, through a number of steps, led to the genesis of what we do now.
Fantastic. So this is fast becoming a very big topic. I mean, let's kind of dive into the sort of the big thing that's in the news at the moment. So we talked about this on the show last week, the Workday legal case around bias in recruiting. Lots of things to sort of dig into there about Workday's liability for it. What's kind of really going on? Just give us your take on that particular situation.
Sure. Is it worth going into the details behind the case, or did you cover that recently?
Give us a bit of background on it. I think that would be
Bit
good.
of background is it? Yeah. So a man called Derek Mobley is alleging that Workday's AI based hiring platform has discriminated against him over years on the grounds of race, age, and disability. This is based on the fact that he claims, it's all alleged at this stage, that he's been rejected very rapidly, within minutes or not long from its application, suggesting that it's automated and not a human in the loop, at odd times of the day, out of office hours in the night, and things like that indicate that it's automated, over hundreds of roles. And this is all just in the kind of allegation stage. There's no evidence has been brought from either side, so we can't make a judgment on that. What's interesting is that Workday as any company under lawsuit would do, has tried to dismiss the case based on a number of grounds. Firstly, that's not an employment agency, which under various anti-discrimination civil rights regulations, you need to be an employer or employment agency or a labor organization to be liable, which an AI tool is not traditionally. However, in the end, the possibility of acting like an agency has been, Workday systems have been judged as being able to be like that. They've also made the denial or motion to dismiss based on the fact that humans are ultimately in the loop. So apparently it's not fully automated. And so ultimately somebody presses a button or does something else based on the information the AI system provides, which is a very common kind of get out of jail free card that all vendors tend to do. So we're just supporting this something here, and that has been ruled as not sufficient reason to mean that it's not plausible that this has a discrimination component. So those are some of the interesting aspects, at least as far as I'm concerned, that mean for this. A number of implications as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of no guarantee that this is even going to go to court. So it's there's a kind of a long journey for it. Yeah, but it does raise some very, as you say, I think it raises some even if it goes nowhere, I think it starts a discussion about some of the assumptions that people had around AI and recruiting that is, I guess, a really important one to have. So it's sort of, what is it that from a regulation perspective, we obviously hear a lot about the EU AI Act, various other sort of types of AI legislation that are being looked at around the world or not looked at around the world in some, in some countries. In this case, this is actually kind of existing legislation, isn't it? That's kind of being invoked. So to talk us through that a bit.
Yes, so this is one of the key implications and kind of important points about this. This is the first time, I think, or more or less the first time, that an AI system, AI agent, whatever terminology you want to use nowadays, is being sort of upheld against long-standing, pre-existing labor laws that predate this type of technology and are not designed for it, which sets a precedent, and an important one, which is that fundamentally, there are gaps in our regulation that mean that these new AI regulations are can add value, but fundamentally, we don't need necessarily a whole swathe of new regulations to regulate AI technology, particularly as AI, as we all know, in so many ways approaches or tries to imitate human intelligence. So we already have all these regulations, whether it's in discrimination or otherwise. We have a lot of them, and what we really need, and where I think the American legal system is actually at its best in this scenario, and whatever happens next, is that it's making a move to potentially, if it sees justification, uphold those against an AI based system, irrespective of its human or AI. So that's a really important point, and it's got potentially far ranging consequences beyond talent acquisition, beyond bias as well, but certainly on that topic as well. We'll probably expect to see other lawsuits on this ground, just as there was over 100 lawsuits in the US about discrimination with the EEOC last year from people. Why wouldn't there be a number with AI systems where some are biased, some not biased, whatever it may be? Seems like that's the way things might go.
So one of the things that this has done is it's created a huge amount of noise in the industry. People sort of throwing their hands up in the air. Employers saying they'll never use AI because of this, and vendors all arguing with each other about what's possible, that sort of stuff. It's just, I think it's important we just cut through that and actually look at kind of what's really going on. So let's have a bit of a reality check here. So I think this is probably a really good time to sort of talk about what your platform does. Talk us through what is it that you do and what kind of safeguards you can give people.
Yeah, good question. So we are a third party that works with AI systems, both with the vendors that develop them and also the organizations that deploy them, to evaluate AI risks like bias. Some other things we do as well, but let's keep it simple, and that's our top kind of product and top demand and relevant in this case. And so what we do is we ultimately measure bias using a couple of different techniques. It's got a lot of math behind that, and fundamentally data as well. So data provided either by the system that we're evaluating, if we can get information from employers, for example, about candidates and so on, and also crucially, we have our own unique proprietary data sets of real people that we've collected with permission to use. And so we can bring all this data together and evaluate systematically how AI behaves with relates to bias, and use that to benchmark it, and check that's within certain thresholds. That it's impossible. It's difficult to say with absolute certainty. There's none, or here's, but actually benchmark it and check that it is within kind of appropriate thresholds. That means it's unlikely to be systemic, significant, harmful bias. And then that gives people the confidence to use that system. If there are issues, they can mitigate it and fix it. And ultimately, demonstrate to any stakeholders that might engage with the system that it's safe and trustworthy to use. And also, final point is, in the case of being challenged, like in a lawsuit or any other claim or anything like that, our platform provides that evidence to justify, right? So we're doing this. Our system is ongoing. We're doing very kind of continuous tests and auditing down to a timestamp period and that data and analysis done at that time can be used just to defend or explain the system at that particular time.
Yeah, and I think this is really important because, as I said a minute ago, one of the things that I have seen is, some employers, TA teams, HR teams saying, well, actually, do you know what? We're not touching AI until we know the regulations and what happens and all this sort of stuff. And that to me is just it's an incredibly dangerous position to be in. I think going back to some of the things we were talking about earlier in the show, about decisions about, automation and AI not being made outside of HR and being done to HR, and also the competitive kind of advantage here. It's just, it's not a head in the sand moment. And I think the good thing is that, you work with a number of vendors in this space already who kind of meet those standards and actually, don't have any of those issues, don't you?
That's it. Yeah, exactly. I think it's very much the biggest risk in many cases is to not innovate and not move forward for most organizations. And so I totally agree with that point. And our approach is that, like, what's great about this case is that it helps highlight that the risks are real. It is a real issue, and people need to take it seriously. But risks can also be measured and managed, as we do with all aspects, with risks in other domains of technology. And the pragmatic way forward is to recognize that these are risks that need to be managed and make sure that they are managed correctly by doing a mixture of things, from asking vendors difficult questions and asking for evidence and backup to their claims, among other things, but not to just turn away and say there's a potential of risk, let's not do anything here. There's risk in human-based hiring, as we talked about in the show already.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, because you think that we're kind of heading for a situation where the AI is being held to a higher standard than the humans. Because I think, one of the things that struck me when I first sort of heard about this Workday story was, ageism in recruiting is just everywhere, and humans do it all the time. So do you think AI is being held to a kind of a higher standard here? Is that right?
definitely is true. And in fact, even in this case, to speculate on what's happening, without knowing the details of the Workday system, of course, is that it could be that it's people who've set it up, and the employers and the users that they've set it up in this way, and so it's really them perpetuating their bias through the platform, which is still an issue, of course. It definitely AI is held to a higher standard than humans, which is a blessing and a curse, right? Like on the one hand, it's almost like our, as we kind of collectively move more and more kind of human-based systems to AI, our ability to do better than we've done ourselves, kind of thing. It's like almost like live up to our ideals, even if we don't live up to them ourselves, which is not necessarily a bad thing, and so on. But if the standards set so high and we forget how bad the status quo is, then there's a risk we'll never get there, because it's like, well, if it's not 100% non-biased, it doesn't matter that we are like 50% biased in our human-based processes, and so there's that, I think, slight challenge with some people's minds at the moment. But fundamentally, do you think that people do see that the benefits are too great? And even on this particular point of fairness in AI, is that what we're seeing, actually, we have a report coming out on this soon, and there's lots of caveats to this data point, obviously, but that on average, AI systems are more fair than humans. On that, on average. Of course, not always, but
yeah, I can see that, and I think that's the kind of the message that I hope doesn't get lost in all of this. Actually, if used properly, AI could radically reduce the bias that we're already seeing in recruiting. A final question for you. I'm just interested in your view on what the future's going to look like. Where are we going with this stuff? You obviously get to see a lot of the systems that are being built. How do you think this is all going to sort of pan out in terms of sort of AI and hiring?
Good question. I think for the kind of next phase, if you will, a few years, whatever, I think we'll end up replicating, just speeding up a lot of the ways we approach things today with AI. So bringing AI into resume screening, for example, as is commonly happening, more efficient, more fast, potentially more fair if done right. What I think might change more broadly, I think I actually mentioned this when I was on your podcast a few months ago. I think we might move away from some of those processes that are time efficient for people into things where time efficient doesn't matter with the AI, but are more effective. For example, an AI interviewer, like first stage interviewer, could interview every single candidate without needing to like see a resume, or an AI screener could review a resume or profile of someone that's very detailed. That's not like really short, like a resume is short, so that you can glance at it as a person. Yes. So I think over time, what happen is we'll move away in some way from the kind of just doing things in minimal, fast ways because people have time, and do things in more rigorous, slow ways. But AI can do it, and the net result will be faster itself. I don't mean so net result will be that it's a more rigorous, maybe more fair kind of hiring process where everyone gets a chance to have a chat with an AI, for example, rather than just submit a resume that gets in the dustbin, in the bin, or something like that I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's kind of everyone has a chance. Yeah, everyone has a chance to put their story across. Everyone has a chance for their entire kind of background to be checked, to be taken into account. Those kind of things. I mean, I hope that's where we're heading. That it's all going to be positive. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Cool. Okay.
All right. So let's talk about Ulta's new employee creator program, because honestly, this is one of the smartest moves I've seen in retail marketing in a while. They're calling it Ulta Beauties, and they're paying their store associates to make 2+ TikToks per month about the products that they actually sell, not just letting them post, paying them to post, giving them PR packages, brand trips, even social media training. And it's working, like outperforming traditional influencer campaigns. And it makes sense. These employees know the products, they hear customer questions every day, and they don't need a script, right? They know what actually sells. Their content feels real because it is real. But here's what I keep thinking about. This is bigger than just marketing. It's a shift in how we think about work. The next generation of employees doesn't just clock in, they create. And the companies that tap into that, these are the companies that are going to win. And we've spoken about this on the show before about companies who are hiring like office influencers and things like that. But I really like how Ulta is doing it because they're using the employees that are already doing this. They're already talking to clients. They're already selling the product, but they're actually paying them. They're recognizing that this is separate work and they're paying them for it. But now let's talk about compensation because I love that Ulta is paying their people for this. Don't get me wrong. But the reality is, if you're a W 2 employee, that extra income is taxed like a bonus most of the time, like no write offs, no deductions. You can't treat your phone bill or lighting setup as a business expense like a 1099 creator could. And while technically, yes, you can have both a W 2 employee and a 1099 contractor for the same company, the IRS has such strict rules that content creation work has to be totally separate from your day job. Different hours, different scope, different tools. And let's be honest, most companies are not going to risk it. I actually posted about this earlier today, and those are the answers that I'm already getting. I know I've been in HR and TA for a while, and that's really what most companies are not going to risk it because of all the audit implications that could happen. So what happens? These employees do the same kind of work a UGC creator would, but without the tax benefits, without the flexibility, and often without the long-term ownership of the content, because that's a whole other thing that I don't know the details of. So I still think this model is absolutely trending. But the next phase isn't just about scaling it. It's about figuring out how to do it sustainably. If your employees are building your brand on TikTok, they're not just associates, they're creators, and the compensation model needs to catch up. Matt, what do you think?
Well, there's a lot to there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, fundamentally, I agree that this is 100% trending. I think it makes perfect sense. Companies are sort of desperate to get their products out onto social media in an authentic way. And why not let the people, as you say, who use them every day, who've been trained on how to sell them, actually get out there and do it. And I think also it really taps into the fact that culture is changing, and that's kind of affecting work. We're talking about generations coming into the workforce, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, when they arrive in a few years' time, and they're like creator natives. They just this is how they communicate. They just create stuff, and they will always do, a fundamentally better, more authentic job than the agency you pay or all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a really smart idea, and it makes a lot of sense. I suppose on the employment aspect, I think that is interesting, and it kind of highlights that work is changing, and some of the structures that we have in place have to recognize that. But when you're talking about IRS taxes, all those kind of things, they take a very long time to catch up. So that is a sort of potential stumbling block, 100%. I think the other things that I thought about this is there are obviously some implications, because if you are building, and we've seen this before where people have been doing this in a kind of an unofficial capacity, using the employer's name to effectively build a kind of a massive TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is following, which they can then monetize, and it belongs to them because they're the person who's built it. But would the company see it like that? Would the company not think that actually this is an asset that we've helped you build? How do we get compensated for that? Or do you leave your TikTok account behind when you leave the company? I think that's the one thing. And then the other thing that occurred to me is obviously doing the same thing around employment opportunities. And I know we've seen a lot of this in the past, and it gets done, but actually being more kind of structured and deliberate about showcasing employment in this way, I think is an interesting aspect to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Like, I read it and I was like, "This is amazing," and I don't wanna be the Debbie Downer, but as a TA, HR, like, professional, I think about things a little differently than ever it's like, yes, it's so cool that they're getting paid, 100% agree with that. I am team pay employees extra to do extra work. So, I'm never gonna, like, criticize that. But I just started thinking, it's like, in this creator economy, where I know I used to do it as a side hustle, I could save so much on taxes because now I can deduct things and stuff like that. And like you said, I own my audience. The companies I work for never felt that they contributed to helping my audience grow. So I
Mm.
really think it's something that is going to have to be a shift in mentality for companies mainly. And yes, the government at some point will jump on board, but I mean, I don't expect the IRS to be like, "Yes, now," where it's like, no, that's years down the line, but I think companies can have, like, more creative ways of doing it because at the end of the day, depending on the tax bracket that you're on, this sounds really cool, but you might end up paying more in taxes than what you actually make.
Is there a risk in this if every company starts doing it? Because I think one of the things, we've seen the power of TikTok and Instagram in particular to make to massively make products go viral and all that sort of stuff. But even though I think we know that influencers are paid and all that sort of stuff, sometimes the biggest stuff is around. It is very organic and it's around. I can think of there was like a fish and chip shop in the UK that suddenly became like this global sensation because of something to do with TikTok. Do you think there's a risk that if all companies start doing this, then it gets seen as unauthentic content that people aren't necessarily interested in because people are just sort of pushing product?
I think it could be, but it really depends on how people do it. I think the biggest risk, at least the biggest immediate risk, if companies start doing this, is to independent creators like you and I,
Yeah.
because that's gonna always start impacting. We're gonna have to think even more about how to be authentic when we're doing brand deals, because these employees are always, well, not always, but they're gonna have a leg up on the authenticity side, not necessarily on the content creation side, by the way, because I do believe it's the art and the science, and it's not something just like anyone with a camera can be a creator. I'm not saying that, but I think it's something to consider. As far as losing authenticity, I think that's a risk for any type of marketing.
Mm.
The more people adopt it and the more the consumer becomes like, oh yeah, whatever, like blind to it or like used to it, then of course it can become this thing where you're like, yeah, whatever, there's employee blah 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 talking about it. It really depends on how you do it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think it's that interesting relationship between between brands and creators. I don't even ask me why I was doing this, but earlier today I was reading about casino influencers. People who record videos of them winning huge amounts of money on slot machines and that kind of stuff. And there's a kind of a very sort of strong theory that the casinos are giving them fake money to win because they're making it seem like it's easy to win on these machines, and therefore more people are coming into the casino. So I think there's kind of a lot of things kind of going on out there around, around this. And I think it's a super interesting thing. And I think that, yeah, that whole thing about, independent creators versus people who are, working for the company with brand deals. It's going to kind of be interesting. I mean, I suppose it would be good just to sort of, flip this to the employment side of things. I mean, do you think that, we can see more of this kind of authentic content for employment stuff that sort of comes more organically by people talking about their job than sort of campaign driven stuff?
I think so. I think, like you mentioned, the generations that are coming into the workforce, this is literally what they do and how they communicate, and like everything they think about, whatever's happening to them, they think about turning on a camera
Yeah.
um, and documenting it and sharing it online. So, yes, it's definitely going to keep happening and happen more. And it's just going to be the norm in a couple of years. I'm sure, like, 10, and maybe that's even too much, 5 years, this is gonna be literally the way that companies do marketing or most of their marketing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing you were talking about, not everyone could be a creator. It's not just picking up a camera and doing all that kind of stuff. And there is absolutely an art form to it, and lots of technical stuff and things like that. At the same time, it's getting easier and easier. I mean, looking at some of the software that's out there that helps you, build this kind of stuff and do these kind of things, it's just accelerating, and a lot of it is AI driven as well, which is just meaning there's even more content out there.
I think vendors are going to get smarter about the type of software that they build. And then there's going to be, like, right now, a lot of the creator driven software is really marketed towards creators. So prices are lower. Lower, I say, because when I look at how much I spend on software every month, it's not that low. But I think companies that are smart, software companies that are smart, are going to really jump in on this game and be like, oh, now I can have enterprise level type of creator software that can be
Right.
sold to companies. And then that's an appeal. As a creator, I would be like, ooh, I want to use that. I'll go work somewhere part time and be a creator there if I get access to this type of tool. So I see way more positives than
Yeah,
negatives in this,
absolutely.
and I
Yeah.
definitely see it as a trend.
And I suppose also there's an opportunity there in those kind of software platforms to have the compliance and the brand stuff and all the things that marketing departments are worried about. Just unleashing employees, talking about the products. You can sort of have that in the background without, current situations where people might, record a video and wait 3 months for it to be to be approved to go out.
Yes, we know that. I'm sure you've run into it as a independent creator. I know I have. And I'm sure and as an employee as well, I would run into that where it's like it takes forever for everyone to approve it. It's like by the time it's released, it's like, "Oh, the video didn't do that well." Well, TikTok trends last like a week, not 3 months. No one even remembers this trend. We've had like 10 more trends by the time this one's out.
Exactly, exactly. Although they kind of come round again. There must be kind of a classic trend thing sort of happening there. Well, thank you very much for kind of bringing that to us. I mean, from my perspective, I think that's definitely trending. I think you probably agree, don't you?
Yes, I do. And I'm actually going to be talking about this way more in depth with an employment lawyer and some compensation people on the Workfluencer podcast in upcoming weeks. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. Make sure you check that out. So that brings us to the end of another show. It's been great to talk to everyone. Brilliant to have all the conversations that we've had. You can check out all the great shows that are on the Purple Acorn Network. All the other shows: the HR Morning Show, My First Job, From the Desk, From X to Z. If you want to check out my longer form interviews, you can take a listen to Recruiting Future, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also search the Alder Hour and listen to all of all 26 of our episodes as podcasts if you want to as well. And why wouldn't you? So the Alder Hour will be back next week. I'm already looking forward to it. And this is Matt Alder, clocking out.